And the Sefer of Sefer Devarim is a monologue. It's a monologue from God, from Moshe, in the last 5 weeks of his life. The last 5 weeks of Moshe's life, he spends teaching Torah to the Jewish people. And in doing so, he also prepares them for going into the land of Israel. He prepares them for a reality without having their leader, Moshe Rabbeinu, who has been leading them throughout the time that they left Mitzrayim and through now, about to enter the land of Israel. He is preparing them for, not repeating the same mistakes. I mean, think about it like any good parent, right? Before your kid gets married, or you send them off to college or off to yeshiva. So you do similar things, right? You have talks with them about, that I'm not going to always be there, and you have to take care of yourself, that you're not always going to have my immediate guidance in that way. Learn from the mistakes you made in the past, try not to repeat them, right? Like any good caring parent, Moshe does the exact same thing for the Jewish people. And this 5-week monologue culminates with Moshe Rabbeinu's death. And throughout Sefer Devarim, we learn all of these different kinds of things. We learn about the laws pertaining to the land of Israel, and we also learn some basic Torah Judaism. I mean, like, for example, Parshas Nitzavim, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem Lifnei Hashem Elokechem, that the Jewish people are gathered before God. Parshas Nitzavim, which we'll get to in a few weeks, is like basically just the ABCs of Judaism, basic fundamental Judaism. And that's really what all of Sefer Devarim is. The Satmar Rebbe Zatzal used to joke that he doesn't understand why people learn so many Musar Sfarim. That there are books on Jewish philosophy written by the Ramchal and the Mesilas Yesharim and the Derech Hashem, and you have the Chovas Halavavos written by Rabbeinu Bachaya, and you have books written by more contemporary authors of works from Rav Wolbe, the Alei Shor, and you have Rav Shimshon David Pincus, and all these books on Jewish philosophy, which we all learn, we all study, and we all try and learn from. He says, I don't know why everyone spends so much time learning all of these different works on Jewish philosophy, like from the Maharal Prague, and what's the purpose of it? All you need is Sefer Devarim. Sefer Devarim has all of Jewish philosophy in it. So he used to say it in a kibbutzing kind of way. Of course, he himself authored a number of different works on Jewish philosophy. But the idea being that in Sefer Devarim, you really have everything you need to know. In fact, the Gemara refers to Sefer Devarim in a few places. The Talmud in Maseches Yevamos on Daf Hey refers to Sefer Devarim, the fifth of the 5 books of Moshe, where Moshe is having this monologue, as Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah means the repetition of the Torah. Moshe is going through all the fundamental principles contained within the Torah. As we mentioned, as the Ramban makes very, very clear, that Sefer Devarim is also supposed to be a Musar work. It's supposed to be a work not just going through fundamental mitzvos, but even fundamental Jewish principles in how to be a good person. And Moshe is rebuking the nation during certain points in the Sefer as well. We know in Parshas Ki Savo, there's a very long rebuke that takes place in Parshas Ki Savo of what's going to happen if you don't follow God's path. But even right over here in Parshas Devarim, right out the gate, Moshe is already rebuking the nation. And the Torah begins with this pasuk that is very cryptic. Ela Dvarim Asher Diber Moshe al Kol Yisrael. These are the things that Moshe is teaching the Jewish people. Again, this is the beginning of his 5-week-long monologue before he passes away. Be'ever HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan. Excuse me one moment. Be'ever HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan. Bamidbar ba'arva mol suf, that it was through the wilderness in Arba near Suf, bein Paran ubein Tofel, between Paran and Tovel, the Lavan v'chatzeros v'di zahav, and also Lavan chatzeros and di zahav. It's very cryptic. We have no clue exactly what Moshe is. Where are we? We don't exactly know from reading the pasuk. We're on the other side of the Jordan through the wilderness in Arba near Suf, between Paran and Tofel. These aren't even necessarily places. It's very confusing exactly what's happening. So Rashi tells us that Moshe was trying to hint some things through this cryptic language. Lefi, says Rashi over here on the right side of the screen. Lefi, everyone can see my screen, right? Right? Yeah. Lefi shehein divrei tochachos. Moshe was trying to give words of rebuke. Umane kan kol hamekomos isu lifnei hamakom. And Moshe here is listing all of the places that the Jewish people angered God. Lefikach, therefore, sasam es hadvarim. Therefore, he only hinted. He kept his words very brief. Veskiram beremez. He only hinted to the mistakes that the Jewish people made. Mipnei kvodan shel Yisrael, in order to adhere to the honor, in order to keep the honor of the Jewish people. Now, what Rashi, it seems as though Rashi is telling us, is that Moshe was very concerned that he didn't want to, diminish the honor of the Jewish people, and therefore, when it was time to give them rebuke, he did it in a soft kind of way. He hinted to it. Now, while this is very, very nice, and just by the way, before we analyze this Rashi a little more, what are these places that Moshe was referring to? What are these mistakes that he was hinting to when he said Me'evar Yarden, Bamidbar, Ba'arva, Molsuf? So Rashi tells us, he goes through each and every place. That Bamidbar, we were not in the Midbar at this point when Moshe was giving the speech. We were right on the banks of the Jordan before we go into the land of Israel. So then, what is the Torah referring to when it says Mahu Bamidbar? El B'shvil Masheh Isuhu Bamidbar. But rather, it's because of the fact that the Jewish people angered God in the Midbar when they complained. Also, Ba'arva, what it's referring to is the fact that they sinned. Ba'arvas Moav, they sinned with the idol of Baal of the Baal Peor. Molsof is referring to the fact that when Bnei Israel sinned at Kriyas Yamsuf, when they complained to God, basically saying that you shouldn't have taken us out of Egypt just for us to die over here, right? And each and every one of these things are hints to mistakes the Jewish people made. Now, hold on one second. If the whole purpose over here, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to leave the Jewish people with a lasting message, so then what should he have done? He should have been very explicit with them. I understand he wanted to hold on to and preserve the honor of the Jewish people, as Rashi points out. But this is his final opportunity. In 5 weeks from now, Moshe Rabbeinu is not going to be alive anymore. He knows that his time with the Jewish people is very, very limited. And that's exactly why he is giving over this speech. So if this is his last chance to teach the Jewish people between right and wrong, how to set them up for success, be as explicit as possible. Why hint to it in a way where some people might have missed it, and you need to look at the Rashi on it? Like, just be explicit with us. If you want us to get the message, Moshe, then tell us straight. This is our last chance with you. Tell us like it is. Tell us the mistakes we made. We don't want to make the same mistakes again. And in fact, we know that Moshe himself does this. In Parshas Kisavo, the list of the curses that could befall the Jewish people, and we know that through the generations have befallen the Jewish people. And God forbid, but in a few days from now, if God forbid Mashiach doesn't come, we're going to be experiencing Tisha B'Av to commemorate all of the tragedies that befell the Jewish people that are outlined in the Tochacha, that are outlined in the rebuke, that long, elongated rebuke and chastisement that Moshe gives to the Jewish people later on in Sefer Devarim. So if he was explicit then, he should have been explicit here. Why is Moshe hinting to everything right now? And just to preserve the honor of the Jewish people, I mean, this is your last chance, Moshe. I don't think the Jewish people are going to have a taina on you. I don't think that they're going to have a complaint about you, that you were a little too rough with them, if this is your very, very last chance. So maybe Moshe was trying to teach them another lesson here. Not just don't make the same mistakes that you made in your travels between Mitzrayim and now. That Of course, Moshe and these things are reiterated a number of times throughout Sefer Devarim. The mistakes that were made and not repeating the same mistakes. I mean, the prohibition of avodah zarah, I think, is repeated something like 25 times in Sefer Devarim. Idolatry is repeated so many times. There's a number of times Moshe is going to go through, don't make the same mistakes. But Moshe was also trying to teach the Jewish people the importance of preserving the honor of another person, the sensitivity that if you see someone made a mistake or is going to make a mistake, there's a way to tell them and there's a way not to tell them. It's not so much about what you say, but it's about how you say it. Right out the gate, Moshe was not necessarily just trying to teach them the difference between right and wrong with regard to these mistakes in particular. Yes, of course, that's true. And we know that Rashi tells us that. But we know that Moshe is also going to be repeating them later. So what's one message that we know Moshe is trying to teach the Jewish people right now? That you can never lose your sensitivity. That if you know you have to be in a leadership role where you have to tell people between right and wrong, there's a way to do it and there's not a way to do it. The sensitivity that needs to come when educating and with directing is something that is above all else. These are the words. This is the message that Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to teach the people. Make sure that you carry sensitivity, that you have that sort of care for others. We know that, and it's no coincidence that that Parshas Devarim is always right before Tisha B'Av. There's no coincidence that Parshas Devarim is always Shabbat Chazon. It's always the Shabbos preceding Tisha B'Av. Why? Because we know that on Tisha B'Av, we mourn the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Specifically in the second temple, it was destroyed because the Jewish people lost that sort of sensitivity for one another. They didn't care about one another. They didn't respect one another in that kind of way. And that's why that just for that, the Gemara tells us in Maseches Yuma, the Gemara tells us that during the time of the Second Temple, the Jewish people were from a Yidden. They were religious. They followed Torah mitzvos. They learned Torah. They did all the mitzvos. They everything. What were they missing though? Sensitivity towards one another, caring towards one another. They looked down upon one another. They lost that sensitivity. It's no coincidence that as we're about to, hopefully we aren't, but and maybe the next few days will make a difference. But if, God forbid, there needs to be a Tisha B'Av, what we're going to be mourning is the fact that we didn't listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. We didn't listen to Eila HaDvarim. We didn't listen to these words. And we know that while the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed a long, long, long time ago, thousands of years ago, but we know that the fact that we still don't have it rebuilt, it's the same thing as if we destroyed it. And it comes straight from the Talmud Yerushalmi. Kol dor she'enu nivne b'yamav ma'alin alav hakasav ki'ilu hechrivo. That any generation that does not see the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt, ma'alin alav, it's the Torah assumes that it's as if ki'ilu hu hechrivo. It's as if that generation destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. I just also want to point out something that is very important that I think people miss when reading this Gemara. Is ki'ilu hu hechrivo. It's as if he destroyed it. What should it have said? Ki'ilu heim hechrivo. As if they destroyed it. The generation that did not take the lesson of being kind and sensitive to one another, it's as if they destroyed it. No. Ki'ilu hu hechrivo. All it takes is one person to have that kind of lack of sensitivity, to be desensitized to one another. So then it causes a ripple effect, and other people catch on to that same sort of negativity and that same sort of ill feelings towards one another. Ki'ilu hu hechrivo. One person can cause that kind of a domino effect. Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words. This is what Moshe is right away trying to teach the Jewish people. You're going into the land of Israel? Wonderful. You want to hold on to it? Make sure you follow suit. That just because someone makes a mistake, that's okay. And people aren't perfect. But make sure that you always respect them. Make sure that you hold on to, you hold on to the honor of the Jewish people. And you are sensitive to one another. Dr. Mendel Hirsch, who is the son of Rav Samson Lefar Hirsch. Rav Samson Lefar Hirsch lived from 1808 to 1888. I pulled up a picture of him. I'm sure many of you have seen a picture of him, but just in case, this is Rav Samson Lefar Hirsch. He was a Yeki posek and Jewish philosopher and Rav, an unbelievable Talmid Chacham, and really a revolutionary in the realm of that. He didn't necessarily come up with a revolutionary way to approach Torah, but he made a way that Torah was learned, hundreds of years before him, generations before him, like the Rambam, and made it accessible to his generation in a way that was toe in toe with, the fact that philosophy was very popular then. It was part of the Enlightenment movement. We're talking about, the 19th century Germany was rampant with the growth of the Reform movement and the conservative movement. And Rav Samson Lefar Hirsch was able to take the same Holy Torah, but made it accessible to the modern era of Torah im derech eretz, of that you're able to be a person of the world, but also adhere to Torah principles. And in fact, Torah principles speak to the way we're supposed to function in the modern world. And it was something that he was masterful at, and it's prevalent in all of his writings. His son, Dr. Mendel Hirsch, wrote an addendum, you call it an addendum, an appendix, to one of Rabbi Hirsch's, Rav Samson Lefar Hirsch's writings, where Rav Samson Lefar Hirsch has a commentary on the Chumash that was recently, only about 10 years ago, republished by Feldheim, and expanded and done in a very beautiful way. But it was a commentary that Rav Hirsch wrote in German, again, to make it accessible for everyone. Then it was translated into Hebrew, it was translated into English. And then Feldheim only recently republished it in a little bit of an easier English. And his son, Dr. Mendel Hirsch, wrote in the same style as his father a commentary to the Haftorah, which are fascinating essays. It really opens up the Haftorah. If you're ever curious about the connection between the Haftorah and the Parsha and what the Haftorah is about, which is something that is often overlooked, Rabbi Dr. Mendel Hirsch really opened up the Haftorah. And in his commentary to the Haftorah on Devarim, I don't have a digital copy for everyone, but I'll show in the screen. This is the cover page. I made a photocopy. This is the cover page in the original German. This is, I did not read the German, but this is the piece that we're going to learn tonight, translated in English, but this is the one in German. But here's the one in English. I just want to read to you a quote where he connects, where he gives us a little bit of a frame of reference for this week that we're entering into, of Shvuah Shechal Bo Tishvuah, the week that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. He writes, "The Jew does not mourn that thousands of years ago the temple was destroyed. That's not what we mourn, but that it had to be destroyed." Isn't that amazing? We don't mourn over the fact that there was an edifice, a temple that burned to the ground. And if you think about it, it's kind of like silly. Like, why is that such a big deal? I understand that, the fact that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, I mean, it's, okay, I get it. Like, it was a temple and it's very sad, but I mean, at the end of the day, what is it? It's stone and gold and silver. I mean, it's material objects. What does God care about material objects? So what happened is that the Beis Hamikdash was built, and as the Torah tells us, when the Mishkan was built, that v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socho, and I'm going to have my presence in it. But so therefore, the destruction of the temple is not what we mourn, rather the fact that it had to be destroyed, the fact that we didn't care about the fact that God's presence was there, and that we learn from what God really wants from us, to be sensitive to one another. We don't mourn over the fact that the temple was destroyed, but that it had to be destroyed, not over the destruction, but over the causes of its destruction. Thereby, our minds are not directed so much to the past, but rather to think about the immediate present time, exactly what we're describing, to put it to the test of considering whether these causes have disappeared, whether obedience to the Torah, whether the noble humanity which this Torah endeavors to obtain has found realization in our Jewish spheres. That is, this generation is the litmus test to that. Ki'ilu hu hekrivo, as if they destroyed it. Our generation is a litmus test to know whether or not we're ready to appreciate again God's presence in the land of Israel, in Yerushalayim, in order so that we could have the Beis HaMikdash again. You know, there's an amazing halacha on Tisha B'Av that when you read it, it doesn't really seem to make any sense. It's a halacha we're familiar with. It's something that many Jews are careful with, but it seems so counterintuitive. The Shulchan Aruch writes the following. The Shulchan Aruch says, Ein she'ela shalom lechavero b'Tisha B'Av. We are not allowed to greet one another on Tisha B'Av. We don't say, hi, how you doing? Tisha B'Av, we keep to ourselves. We're very silent. Even when you see each other, when shul was functioning in full form, so then there were more of us seeing each other, but still, we'll go outside. So, people are able to say hi from a distance. Tisha B'Av, not at all. We stay silent. It would seem so counterintuitive. The day that we're mourning over the fact that we caused polarization amongst the Jewish people, that people didn't care about one another, they didn't have sensitivity to one another. Now we're going to give this cold shoulder to people on Tisha B'Av itself. We're obligated to give a cold shoulder to people.
Because it's mourning.
It seems so counterintuitive. And I'll give you another it seems very counterintuitive. Again, the Shulchan Aruch says that on Tisha B'Av, Aser berachitza v'sicha. Oh, okay, we're not allowed to anoint ourselves fine. Milas asanda, we're not allowed to have leather shoes. Tashamita, we're not allowed to have marital relations. Va'aser likros b'Torah, and we're not allowed to learn Torah. Nevi'im, ksuvim, we're not allowed to learn any of the written Torah. V'lishnos b'mishno b'medrash, we're not allowed to learn any sort of Torah, not mishnayos, not medrash, not gemara, not halacha, not agadada, no Torah at all. The only Torah we can learn, the Shulchan Aruch says, aval korahu be'iyov. You can only learn Torah like Eov, like the most horrific story one can read. It's things that are supposed to be heart-wrenching. The Devarim Haroim should be Yirmiyah. You learn about the Navi Yirmiyah that talks about the destruction of the temple. Only that kind of Torah you can learn. You cannot learn any other Torah. Now, hold on one second. We've spoken about many times, a theme in many of our classes and our discussions have been about how Torah is not just an intellectual pursuit, but rather Torah is a guide, is a blueprint to how to be a good person. We've spoken many times about how the Rambam says that that's exactly why learning Torah is tantamount to any other mitzvah in the Torah. It stands the highest of the most important mitzvah. Why? The Rambam explains. Simply because when you learn Torah, it teaches you how to be a good person. So hold on one second. On Tisha B'Av, the day where we are mourning over the fact, as Rabbi Dr. Mendel Hirsch said, that we did not have enough sensitivity to one another, and that's why we're mourning. We're mourning over the fact that the Beis HaMikdash had to be destroyed, and that our generation did not pass the litmus test of the Beis HaMikdash being rebuilt. And we're mourning over the fact that we don't carry that sense of goodness, of noble morality, that humanity that we should have. So hold on one second. What's the fast track to getting that morality? Through learning Torah. So hold on one second. Two things that are supposed to be the things that are the two things that we are mourning over the fact on Tisha B'Av that we did not develop yet in our generation are the fact that we are not yet kind or sensitive enough to one another, and the fact that we have yet to learn from the Torah how to be a good person. And it's these two things that we refrain from on Tisha B'Av. We give each other the cold shoulder, and by not addressing one another, by not engaging with one another, by not giving shalom to one another, and we don't learn Torah. Seems so counterintuitive. So Rabbi Melech Biderman, who's a mashpia, he's a very influential person in Israel. He's a mashkiach. He's really a tzaddik. He's an unbelievable person whose Torah has in recent years been spreading around like wildfire. It's caught a lot of popularity. So he explains that when you stop and think about it, because of the fact that our generation has yet to pass this test of, that we aren't just giving each other lip service of, hey, how you doing? But rather in our heart of hearts, we really care to know how you're doing. And that we don't just learn Torah, because learning Torah today, I mean, compared to any other generation, the amount of Torah that's going on, even in this era, even in an era where yeshivas are closed and shuls are not having necessarily formal shiurim in public, but I mean, the fact that every single class now, the attendance has basically doubled, not just in person, but also the fact that they're being posted on YouTube and going around, and the fact that there are these national organizations that are pulling in Torah and spreading it all over the world, and Jews from all different shapes and sizes and affiliations are learning together through this virtual platform. I mean, the amount of Torah that's happening pre-corona era, current era, and I would imagine in the future is more Torah than ever was studied in the history of humankind. When I went into New York for David Wogelanter's wedding, so I took the opportunity that I got to Lakewood a couple hours early, and I was able to learn in Beis Midrash Gavoa in Lakewood for a couple hours before going to the wedding in Lakewood. It's mamish like a city. It looks like a Torah-focused Manhattan. Literally, people bustling everywhere with Gemaras and talking and learning. And there's 10,000 students in the Lakewood Yeshiva. It's unprecedented. It's unbelievable. But we as a generation, while we may greet one another, hey, how you doing? But what are we missing in our hearts of really wanting to know how you're doing? We might learn a lot of Torah, but how much of that Torah is penetrating our hearts? So therefore, on Tisha B'Av, we stop. We completely stop. We don't give the fake, hi, how are you? We don't learn, to use a very extreme language, the fake Torah. We don't just go through the motions, but we take a day to stop and consider whether or not I'm actually learning Torah with the right intention in order for it to make me into a better person, whether or not I'm taking the Torah's messages and applying it to my life, whether or not when I say hi to my friend, I really mean it. So you know what? Today, I'm not going to do it at all. So that way tomorrow, I'll do it the real way. So that way on Yud Av, when I learn Torah again, it's going to be done with a frame of mind of that, no, I'm not just simply going through an intellectual pursuit, but I'm changing myself. I'm becoming a better person, a more upstanding, moral, noble individual that's going to give to humanity in a positive way. Ela hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the final words that Moshe wants to leave with the Jewish people. These are the words that we need to go into this week, into this Shabbos, into this upcoming week, thinking about constantly, is how am I being a mensch? Am I really being a mensch, or am I just showing on the outside? Am I just talking the talk and walking the walk? Or do I feel it pumping through my veins and through my body and through my heart and through my soul that I really sincerely care about each and every one of my fellow Jews? I wish everyone a wonderful Shabbos. Happy to hang on for a couple minutes as my next class gets ready to begin, if anyone has any questions.